The future doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up in small decisions, in what we normalize, in what we teach, in what we choose not to question. Long before the future becomes visible, it's already being rehearsed in classrooms, in movements, in the stories we tell ourselves about what is possible and who is responsible. Welcome to episode 3, where we take a look into the future and writing the next chapter. I'm Christine Jorgensen, I'm a scientist, and for the past 10 years I've worked in science communication, thinking deeply about how evidence becomes understanding and how understanding becomes action. One thing has become increasingly clear. The future, it doesn't arrive fully formed. It's written slowly through choices, systems, and learning. Now, climate movements are often framed as responses to crisis, reactions to fires, floods, and numbers rising faster than our comfort allows. But they are also shaping something more enduring. They are shaping how we learn about responsibility, about care, about belonging on this planet. Because long after the protests end and long after the policies change, what remains is the learning. And learning doesn't just inform the future, it forms it. Now, how we learn about climate change determines how we respond to it. That's not a metaphor, it's pedagogy. When learning is framed through fear alone, we freeze. When it's framed through denial, we delay. When it's framed through helplessness, we outsource responsibility to leaders, to technology, to a future version of ourselves that never quite arrives. Fear without agency doesn't mobilize, it paralyzes. But when learning is rooted in justice, in responsibility, in relationships, something shifts. Action becomes imaginable. Change becomes possible, and we stop asking, what can I do? As if the answer must be small. And we start asking, what am I a part of? Because learning is never neutral. It either reinforces the world as it is, or it helps us rehearse for the world as it could be. And right now, the climate crisis is also a learning crisis. The future of climate learning will not look the same everywhere, and pretending otherwise, that's a part of the problem. In the global north, climate learning is approaching a crossroads. Awareness is no longer the barrier. Accountability is. The next phase will depend on whether movements are willing to move beyond symbolic action into structural change, beyond learning about climate impacts, and to learning from the systems that cause them. This future will rely education that confronts overconsumption, historical responsibility, and the uncomfortable truth that sustainability without redistribution is simply delay by another name. In the global north, the future of climate learning depends on one uncomfortable question. Will movements move beyond awareness and into accountability? Now, awareness is a starting point. It's not a destination. You can't hashtag your way out of structural harm. You can't infographic your way out of historical responsibility. If learning stops at knowing, it becomes performance. If it never asks who benefits, who pays, and who decides, then the future will look suspiciously like the past, just a little bit greener around the edges. Now, in the global south, the future of climate learning will be shaped by a different struggle. One over voice, ownership, and power. Here, learning will matter not because climate change is abstract, but because it's immediate and lived. The question will be whether local knowledge is respected as expertise or reduced to case studies from someone else's solutions. Whether Indigenous and community-led practices are protected or selectively extracted and repackaged. A just future depends on whether learning becomes something shared and reciprocal, not something taken. In the global south, the stakes are higher. The future of climate learning depends on whether local knowledge is ultimately respected, extracted, protected, simplified, amplified, or repackaged for someone else's credibility. Because communities who have lived sustainably for generations are too far often treated as data sources, not teachers. Their wisdom mined like a resource, their stories put into a footnote, their leadership politely acknowledged and then quietly ignored. A just future can't be built on borrowed knowledge and unpaid expertise. Now, these are not parallel futures. They are deeply entangled ones, and how we choose to learn across them will shape what kind of world becomes possible. Now, every education system has a hidden curriculum. It teaches us not just what we know, but who is allowed to know it. And climate knowledge has long been filtered through the same systems that produced inequality in the first place. Systems that reward extraction, systems that value growth over care, systems that harm and externality, and then act surprise when it shows up everywhere. So the real question isn't whether social movements matter. They do. The real question is, whose movements get resourced, whose knowledge gets legitimized, whose futures are treated as negotiable, because power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it writes the syllabus. Now, every story of life has an arc. And if humanity's relationship with the planet were a book, the early chapters would be really hard to read. Extraction, expansion, denial, delay, a plot driven by belief. There is always more somewhere else. More land, more resources, more time to fix what we've broken later. It's a story that's built on distance. Distance from consequences, distance from responsibility, distance from each other. But this is the thing about stories. They're not destiny. They feel inevitable only when we stop questioning who wrote them in the first place. But folks, the next chapter hasn't been written yet. This is where the metaphor becomes literal, because right now, we are holding the pen. And yeah, it's uncomfortable, because writing the future means letting go of the illusion that we're just passive readers, turning the pages that someone else has already decided. We can't say, that's just how the story goes, without admitting we're choosing not to change it. We are the authors and the characters, shaped by the story so far, but not bound to repeat it. And that means the plot twist isn't coming from outside of us. It isn't a technological miracle or a last-minute hero. It's coming from whether we're willing to rewrite what progress looks like, to change who gets to speak, and to accept that repair is harder than extraction, but far more meaningful. Stories only change when the people inside them do. Folks, the pen hasn't left our hands yet, so let's slow this down. If we were writing the next chapter for humanity, what would we include? Would we finally teach that responsibility is not the opposite of freedom, but it's a condition? The care is not a soft value, but a survival skill. That belonging is not something the earth owes us, but something we must earn every day through how we live. What kind of learners would we need to become? Learners who can sit with complexity without rushing to easy answers. Learners who understand that discomfort is often the entry point to growth. Learners who know that being informed is meaningless without being accountable. And what voices would we finally listen to without interruption, without translation into something that's more palatable, without asking them to prove their worth first? Because the future doesn't need more experts who speak about communities. It needs more people willing to learn with them. Now here's the part a lot of narratives skip. Responsibility. Not as guilt, not shame, but as responsibility, the ability to respond, to recognize that we are not separate from the systems we critique. Neutrality is a choice and rarely an innocent one. that someone should do something is the most passive sentence in the English language. The future doesn't change when responsibility is endlessly deferred to someone else. It changes when it's distributed, when learning teaches us not just what is wrong, but what's ours to carry. So imagine the future, not as a finished ending, but as a chapter that's still being drafted. Some lines are already written. Some can be crossed out. Some haven't found the words yet. And if this is the chapter that we're in, then what matters most isn't just what happens, but what we learn as it unfolds. Because climate movements don't just organise action, they organise learning. They teach us what we pay attention to, who we listen to, what we're willing to change, and what we are still holding on to. And the way we learn together now will shape how this story continues. Not in a single moment, not with a neat resolution, but through thousands of small decisions about responsibility, about care, about whether we treat the planet and each other as something to use or something to live with. Now, the ending, it isn't written yet, but it's being shaped by what we're learning right now. Folks, that pen to write the next chapter, well, that's in our hands.